You had lunch, a real, full lunch. Not a sandwich, not coffee, but a proper meal. You got up from the table satisfied. An hour passes, maybe an hour and a half, and suddenly there's sharp, almost impatient hunger. Not just, I'd like a snack, exactly hunger, which is difficult to ignore. You think, this isn't normal, I just ate. You're right, this isn't normal. Today, as a nutritionist, I'll explain exactly what happens to blood sugar after a meal, why this hunger is so acute, and what helps eliminate it at the physiological level. Let me start with a description of how this plays out in real life. Lunch. You ate soup, a main course, maybe some bread. The first 30 to 40 minutes after lunch, everything's fine, you're full. Then, about an hour or a bit later, something strange appears. Weakness, slight dizziness, irritability without reason, and an acute desire to eat something, preferably something quick, sweet, bread, crackers, anything carbohydrate. Moreover, this sensation escalates quickly and demands immediate response. If you don't eat at this moment, it's hard to concentrate, thoughts about food occupy all attention, work capacity drops. If you eat, 20 minutes later it's normal again. But within the next hour, the same thing. This is how many people's day is structured. A normal meal, an hour later hunger, a snack, hunger again. A continuous cycle. And with it, the feeling that something is going wrong, because normal people don't eat this way. There are several characteristic stories I hear in practice. Before getting to them, an important clarification. Sharp hunger an hour after lunch is experienced by many people, but many have become so accustomed to it that they consider it normal. I just have a fast metabolism. I'm just that kind of person, always eat a lot. Meanwhile, this is a signal speaking of a specific disruption in glycemic control, and it deserves attention, not habituation. First story. A person notices that sharp hunger appears specifically after carbohydrate lunches, pasta, rice, potatoes, bread. After a lunch with meat and vegetables, it doesn't happen, or is significantly weaker. This is a direct and quite telling trace of a postprandial glycemic response. Second story. The person had a good protein breakfast, eggs, cottage cheese. Breakfast holds until lunch without problems. Protein digests slowly, blood sugar is stable. Had a carbohydrate lunch, and an hour later hungry again. This speaks to the problem being exactly in the lunch, in its specific composition, and in how the body responds to it glycemically. Third story. Post-lunch hunger is accompanied by drowsiness. Want to both eat and sleep simultaneously. This is classic postprandial fatigue, a consequence of the same insulin spike. What unites all these people? Reactive hypoglycemia. This is a state in which blood sugar rises too high after eating and then falls too sharply. Exactly at the moment of this drop, acute hunger, weakness, and irritability appear. Not because you ate too little, but because blood glucose levels sharply dropped below normal. There's a good way to test the hypothesis in yourself. If you have a glucometer, measure blood sugar right after lunch and again an hour later. If an hour later the value is 1 to 1.5 millimoles per liter lower than the starting point, and you feel hunger and weakness, the picture is obvious. This is postprandial blood sugar drop. If the difference is small but hunger an hour later is still present, worth looking at disrupted satiety signaling rather than glycemia. Now, the mechanism. I'll explain as a nutritionist, precisely and clearly. Let me start with the basics. After eating, glucose from food is absorbed into the blood. Blood sugar rises. In response, the pancreas releases insulin, the hormone that opens cell access to glucose. With slow and even sugar rise, insulin is released smoothly. Glucose levels decrease gradually. With a sharp spike, insulin is released sharply and in large quantities, often excessively. Sugar falls quickly and often drops below the starting level. Here's why this happens so predictably. The pancreas doesn't have instant feedback from blood sugar levels. There's a delay between glycemia change and stopping insulin release. With rapid sugar rise, insulin is released with a margin, and by the time feedback activates, glucose level has already dropped below normal. The brain gets a signal low fuel and immediately demands fast carbohydrates. First mechanism, postprandial glycemic spike. Fast carbohydrates. White bread, white rice, pasta from white flour, potatoes, sweet drinks, are absorbed into the blood rapidly. Glucose rises sharply. The pancreas responds with a powerful insulin release, trying to quickly remove the excess sugar. Insulin copes, but often too well. Sugar drops below normal. Body cells get too little fuel, and this is perceived as hunger. That's exactly why a typical lunch with a large portion of white rice or pasta provokes sharp hunger an hour later, regardless of how caloric that portion was. There's a characteristic sign that helps precisely identify this mechanism. If after lunch you notice light trembling of hands, sweating, irritability, or difficulty concentrating, this isn't simply fatigue. This is neuroglycopenia. The brain signals glucose shortage. All these symptoms pass after a small amount of carbohydrates, which directly confirms the hypoglycemic mechanism. Second mechanism: insulin resistance and disrupted feedback. With insulin resistance, cells respond more poorly to insulin. The pancreas is forced to release more insulin to achieve the same effect. Large insulin release, sharper sugar drop, sharper hunger. This is a closed loop. The more pronounced the insulin resistance, the sharper the postprandial spikes, the stronger the subsequent hunger. A significant point: insulin resistance progresses gradually and for a long time passes without obvious symptoms. Sharp post-lunch hunger is one of the first perceptible signs. This isn't a reason for panic, but a reason to get fasting insulin and HOMA-IR tested to understand the scope of the problem. Simultaneously with insulin resistance, cells receive insufficient glucose even at high blood levels. They starve regardless of glycemia. This intensifies the hunger signal and explains why with insulin resistance, people are chronically hungry even with excess food intake. There's an indirect sign of insulin resistance visible without testing: fat accumulation primarily in the abdominal area with relatively normal overall weight. Dark patches on skin in neck or armpit folds, so-called acanthosis. Constant fatigue after carbohydrate food. The combination of these signs, a reason to get blood tested for fasting insulin and HOMA-IR. Third mechanism: berberine's role in blocking alpha-glucosidase. Here's the key mechanism of berberine as applied to postprandial hypoglycemia. Alpha-glucosidase is an intestinal enzyme that breaks down complex carbohydrates into monosaccharides. The more active this enzyme, the faster glucose is absorbed and the sharper the glycemic spike. Berberine is an alpha-glucosidase inhibitor. It slows carbohydrate breakdown in the intestine and thereby slows glucose entry into the blood. This fundamentally distinguishes it from most nutrients that affect insulin sensitivity. Berberine works earlier, already at the stage of carbohydrate breakdown in the intestine, not allowing the glycemic spike to occur. This isn't treating consequences of an already happened spike, but preventing it. The sugar rise after eating becomes more gradual and moderate. The insulin response, less sharp. The subsequent blood sugar drop, softer. Hunger an hour after lunch, weaker or doesn't appear at all. This is the same mechanism as the class of anti-diabetic drugs, acarbose and miglatol, drugs specifically developed to reduce postprandial spikes. Berberine acts through an analogous pathway through a natural plant alkaloid, without the need to take a pharmaceutical drug. Fourth mechanism: AMPK activation and improvement of cellular nutrition. AMPK, adenosine monophosphate kinase, is an enzyme called the master of metabolism. It activates with cellular energy deficit and launches glucose uptake processes by cells. Berberine activates AMPK, and through it improves glucose uptake by muscle and liver cells. They better receive nutrition, the hunger signal weakens. That's exactly why berberine is often called a natural metformin analog. Both drugs activate AMPK, though through somewhat different molecular pathways. Practical result: cells better get satisfied with the same amount of glucose, and the hunger signal after eating becomes less acute. Fifth mechanism: curcumin and reduction of pancreatic inflammation. Curcumin, the second active component and primary by mass. In the context of post-lunch hunger, its role is special. Chronic inflammation in the pancreas and in insulin target cells disrupts the precision of the insulin response. The pancreas works at full capacity, responds excessively because signaling pathways are inflamed and work imprecisely. Curcumin inhibits NF-κB, the main inflammatory mediator, and reduces the pro-inflammatory background in the pancreas and in insulin-dependent tissues. This improves the precision of the insulin response. It becomes proportional to the glycemic stimulus, not excessive. Additionally, curcumin increases berberine bioavailability. It inhibits intestinal enzymes that break down berberine during first pass. That's exactly why the combination of curcumin with berberine is more effective than berberine alone. Curcumin simultaneously reduces inflammation and increases berberine bioavailability. Less excessive insulin, less sharp blood sugar drop, less acute hunger. Sixth mechanism: connection between eating speed and glycemic spike. This is a mechanism often underappreciated. The speed speed at which food enters the stomach and intestine directly affects the speed of glucose absorption. Fast eating, 5 to 7 minutes for lunch, means simultaneous entry of a large volume of carbohydrates into the small intestine. Alpha-glucosidase breaks it all down quickly. Glucose enters the blood all at once. Slow eating, 20 to 30 minutes, distributes the load. Simultaneously, slow eating gives time for GLP-1 hormone to develop and send a satiety signal to the brain before too much is eaten. This is one of the simplest and immediately effective ways to reduce postprandial glycemic spike. There's a practical technique that helps eat more slowly. Between each bite or spoonful, put the fork on the table and don't pick it up until you've chewed and swallowed. Sounds obvious, but most people physically never do this. Try it for one lunch and you'll be surprised how strongly the feeling of satiety changes. Now, about mistakes. The most typical reactions to sharp post-lunch hunger. Mistake 1. Eat more. Sweets or fast carbohydrates. This is the most common and most destructive reaction. Sharp hunger an hour after lunch? This is a sugar drop. The hand reaches for something quick. A cookie, candy, a piece of bread. Sugar rises quickly, hunger leaves. But 40 minutes later, again a spike drop and again hunger. A person gets into glycemic swings for the whole day. The correct reaction to post-lunch hunger an hour later. A small amount of protein or fat, a handful of nuts, a spoonful of peanut butter, a piece of cheese. They raise blood sugar slowly and without a new spike. Mistake 2. Considering the problem in the amount eaten. Apparently I ate too little, and they increase the portion. But if the problem is in lunch composition and absorption speed, not in calories, a larger portion of fast carbohydrates will only intensify the spike. Sharp hunger an hour later. This isn't a signal about insufficient food. It's a signal about wrong glycemic response to what was eaten. Mistake 3. Having lunch without protein. A meal without protein, almost guaranteed rapid return of hunger. Protein slows gastric emptying, reduces glycemic response, and stimulates GLP-1 secretion. Lunch consisting only of carbohydrates, porridge without an egg, pasta without meat, bread without protein source, this is maximally glycemically unstable. Exactly such meals almost always guarantee a sharp glycemic spike and acute hunger exactly 1 hour after lunch. There's a vivid example from practice. Sushi. This is white rice with a small amount of fish. Despite the dish seeming light, white rice with a high glycemic index gives a fast spike, and acute hunger an hour after sushi is very typical. Replacing with rolls with cucumber, avocado, and adding more fish significantly reduces this reaction. There's a good practical test for verification. Try for a week eating lunches with a large amount of protein and fiber, removing fast carbohydrates. If post-lunch hunger disappears or significantly weakens, this is direct confirmation of the glycemic mechanism. If nothing changes, the cause is different and it's worth looking for it together with a nutritionist or doctor. Mistake 4. Ignoring the role of fiber. Fiber slows glucose absorption. It literally creates a physical barrier between carbohydrates and intestinal digestive enzymes. Lunch with large amount of fiber, vegetables, greens, legumes, gives a significantly more gradual glycemic response. Lunch without fiber, maximally sharp spike. That's exactly why white rice with meat often gives acute hunger an hour later, while brown rice with the same vegetables and protein holds until dinner. The difference is often only in the carbohydrate source and fiber amount. Mistake 5. Not thinking about food order. This is a little known but very practical point. The order in which products are eaten at one meal affects the glycemic response. If you start lunch with protein and vegetables and only then move to carbohydrates, the postprandial blood sugar spike decreases by about 20 to 30% compared to lunch in the reverse order. Ate salad and meat first, then rice, sugar rose moderately. Reverse order, rice first, and the spike is significantly sharper with the same lunch composition. Mistake 6. Ignoring berberine as a tool for reducing postprandial spike. Most people with sharp post-lunch hunger have never considered berberine in this context. They think of it as something for diabetics or for weight loss. Meanwhile, exactly its proven action on alpha-glucosidase and AMPK makes berberine a direct practical tool for reducing postprandial glycemic spikes, completely regardless of whether diabetes is present. Now, what actually works with sharp post-lunch hunger? First, change lunch composition. Every lunch should contain 3 components: protein, fiber, and slow carbohydrates. Exactly the right combination of macronutrients creates a gradual glycemic response and prolongs stable satiety after lunch. Protein slows gastric emptying, fiber slows glucose absorption, slow carbohydrates, whole grains, legumes, give an even sugar rise without a peak. Practically, replace white rice with chickpeas or lentils at least every other day. Add a large portion of non-starchy vegetables to any lunch. Make sure every lunch has meat, fish, eggs, or cottage cheese, not as a side dish, but as the base. There's a study that well illustrates this principle. With the same carbohydrate amount, the glycemic response to pasta with meat sauce is about 40% lower than to pasta without sauce. Simply adding protein changes the entire glycemic picture of the meal. Second, start lunch with protein and vegetables. This is the simplest change with immediate and measurable effect. Eat protein and non-starchy vegetables first, and only then the carbohydrate side dish. No need to remove rice or bread, just change the order. This reduces the postprandial blood sugar spike and accordingly post-lunch hunger an hour later. Why does this work physiologically? Protein stimulates GLP-1 secretion, the hormone that slows gastric emptying and sends a satiety signal. When protein is eaten first, GLP-1 starts working before carbohydrates arrive and smooths their glycemic effect. Third, eat slowly. 20 to 30 minutes for lunch instead of 5 to 7. Chew thoroughly. Put the fork down between bites. This isn't just a rule of etiquette, it's a metabolic tool. Slow eating reduces the speed of glucose entry into the blood and gives satiety hormones time to develop before the end of the meal. Fourth, add vinegar or acid to lunch. A small amount of apple cider vinegar or lemon juice before lunch or in a salad dressing reduces the postprandial blood sugar spike by 15 to 30% according to several studies. Mechanism: acetic acid slows alpha-glucosidase activity. This is a cheap, completely harmless, and well-documented way to reduce glycemic spikes without changing dish composition. Interesting detail: vinegar with lunch is not only about glycemia. Acetic acid stimulates satiety through GLP-1 and reduces overall appetite. So this simple technique has 2 useful effects simultaneously. Fifth, don't drink sweet drinks with food. Sweet juices, soda, sweet tea with lunch. These are fast carbohydrates that absorb immediately and sharply raise blood sugar even before the main food has had time to digest. Result: a double glycemic blow, first from the drink, then from the food. Replace with water, unsweetened tea, or mineral water. Another common mistake: fruit juice as a healthy lunch addition. Even natural juice without sugar contains quickly absorbed fructose and glucose. A glass of orange juice without sugar raises blood sugar almost as fast as regular sweet soda. A whole fruit with fiber and firm structure, a much preferable option. Sixth, berberine before eating as a natural glycemic spike inhibitor. This is a systemic tool working at the intestinal enzyme level. About the specific product in the next section. Now, specifically about berberine with curcumin and why exactly it's relevant for sharp post-lunch hunger. Berberine in the context of postprandial hypoglycemia works through 2 key pathways. First pathway, alpha-glucosidase inhibition. Berberine reduces alpha-glucosidase activity, the enzyme that breaks down complex carbohydrates in the intestine. Lower enzyme activity, slower breakdown, slower glucose entry into the blood. Blood sugar rise after lunch becomes more gradual and moderate. Insulin response, less sharp. Subsequent glucose level drop, softer. Sharp hunger an hour later, significantly weaker or doesn't appear at all. Important practical point: berberine should be taken before eating, not after. It needs time to reach the intestine and start inhibiting breakdown enzymes before carbohydrates from food arrive. 15 to 20 minutes before lunch, optimal interval. Exactly by an analogous mechanism works the class of anti-diabetic drugs, alpha-glucosidase inhibitors. This is a natural analog of that action. Second pathway, AMPK activation. Berberine improves glucose uptake by muscle and liver cells through activation of this enzyme. Cells are better nourished by energy. The hunger signal after eating is weaker. Curcumin 350 milligrams. This is the primary component by mass. Curcumin reduces inflammation in the pancreas and in insulin-dependent tissues, improves insulin sensitivity, and, according to data from a number of studies, itself has moderate alpha-glucosidase inhibitory action, enhancing the effect of berberine. Important question about berberine dosing. When taking Now Foods berberine glucose support, 500 milligrams berberine per soft gel is a well-studied dose. In clinical studies in people with pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes, it significantly reduced fasting glucose and improved insulin sensitivity. How to take to reduce postprandial spikes. spike. Take before lunch, 15 to 20 minutes before eating. Exactly at this moment, berberine begins reducing alpha-glucosidase activity in the intestine before food arrives. With fatty food, fat improves absorption. First changes: reduction of acuteness of post-lunch hunger. Many notice within 2 to 3 weeks of regular use. This time is sufficient for tissue saturation with active component and improvement of glycemic control. Stable effect within 4 to 6 weeks. It's important to understand, berberine works best not in isolation, but in combination with changes in lunch composition. This is a support tool for the system, not a nutrition replacement. With correctly composed lunch and berberine taken before it, the effect multiplies. Both factors simultaneously reduce the spike through different mechanisms. Who is this especially relevant for? First of all, people with sharp hunger 1 to 1.5 hours after a carbohydrate lunch. Those who notice weakness, irritability, or drowsiness after eating. People with cravings for sweets, specifically in the second half of the day. This is often a consequence of the same glycemic pattern. And those who want to reduce glycemic spikes through the nutritional pathway without resorting to pharmaceutical correction. Now Foods berberine glucose support. 90 soft gels at 1 capsule daily intake. This is 3 months of continuous course. Exactly such duration is usually necessary for evaluation of stable effect of berberine on glycemic control and post-lunch hunger. Link to Now Foods berberine glucose support 90 soft gels in the description of this video. https:/www.iherb.com/pr/now-foods-berberine-glucose-support-90-soft gels/88818. Sharp hunger an hour after lunch. This is absolutely not weakness of will and not a sign that you eat a lot. This is reactive hypoglycemia. Sugar first sharply rose, then fell just as sharply. Exactly at the moment of this drop, the brain demands food just as insistently as with genuine hunger. 3 practical steps. First, always start lunch with protein and non-starchy vegetables, and only then the carbohydrate side dish. Second, eat slowly, at least 20 minutes for lunch. This is one of the most simple and systemically underappreciated tools for controlling postprandial glycemia. Third, consider berberine with curcumin taken before lunch as a tool for reducing glycemic spike. Fourth step, optional but very informative. Keep a food and well-being diary for 2 weeks. What you ate, how many minutes later hunger appeared, how acute it was. Already within a few days, clear patterns begin to emerge. Which lunches cause acute hunger and which hold until dinner. This is the most valuable and personalized information for understanding exactly your glycemic profile. And when you see these patterns, you'll no longer be asking the question, why am I hungry again? You'll know exactly the answer and what to do about it. Glycemic swings, a manageable state. You just need to understand the mechanism and consistently change a few specific things in your eating.